used a breakthrough technology called direct storage, which we first pioneered in the Xbox Series X and S. With direct storage, games can quickly load assets to the graphics card without bogging down the CPU. This means you get to experience incredibly detailed game worlds rendered at lightning speeds without long load times. Direct storage optimized Windows 11 PCs are configured with the hardware and drivers needed to enable this amazing experience. But you all know, even the best graphics and speed are nothing without play. Which brings me to the final and most important thing of all: games. That's why we created Xbox Game Pass, built right into Windows 11.
get any disturbances from the mobile. Namaste. A very good morning to everyone. We welcome you virtually to the heritage city of Mysuru and to Central Institute of Indian Languages, Mysuru. On behalf of CIIL, we welcome you to the 53rd Foundation Day inaugural function. As we celebrate 53rd Foundation Day, let us not only celebrate the success and achievement, but also let us take this opportunity to remember the founding members who have given and done so much for setting up this institution in which we are all a part of. Um, Before we proceed further into the program, it is always good to seek God's blessings, and it is considered as a good omen to take God's blessings. So I now would like to request Mr. Chitan to kindly lead us into prayer by singing an invocation song. Chitan, kindly take your time.
नमस्ते। जय जय हे भगवती सुरभारती तव चरणौ प्रणमामः। जय जय हे भगवती सुरभारती तव चरणौ प्रणमामः। नाद ब्रह्ममयि जय वागेश्वरि शरणन्ते गच्छामः। जय जय हे भगवती सुरभारती तव चरणौ प्रणमामः। त्वमसि शरण्या त्रिभुवनधन्या सुरमुनिवन्दितचरणा। त्वमसि शरण्या त्रिभुवनधन्या सुरमुनिवन्दितचरणा। नवरसमधुरा कविता मुखरा नवरसमधुरा कविता मुखरा स्मितरुचिरुचिराभरणा। जय जय हे भगवती सुरभारती तव चरणौ प्रणमामः। आसीना भव मानसहंसे आसीना भव मानसहंसे कुन्दतुहिन शशिधवले हर जडतां कुरु बोधिविकासं हर जडतां कुरु बोधिविकासं सितपङ्कजतनु विमले। जय जय हे भगवती सुरभारती तव चरणौ प्रणमामः। नाद ब्रह्ममयि जय वागेश्वरि शरणन्ते गच्छामः। जय जय हे भगवती सुरभारती तव चरणौ प्रणमामः। प्रणमामः प्रणमामः प्रणमामः। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Chetan, for the Saraswati Vandana. It was a very melodious and pleasing to our ears. Um, Whenever and wherever we are, a warm, welcoming heart makes us feel happy, comfortable, and also makes us feel very special. It will be impolite on our part, on the part of CIIL, if we don't welcome our guests and those who are present here today. So I request Professor cum Deputy Director Umarani Papuswamy to kindly deliver a hearty welcome address. Ma'am, kindly take your time.
Distinguished Chief Guest, Professor Devi Prasanna Patnaik, Founder Director CIL, Guests of Honors, Srimati Suman Dikshit, Deputy Secretary Language, Ministry of Education, Government of India, Professor Nicholas Evans, Director, ARC Center for Excellence of the Dynamics of Language, Australian National University, Australia, Professor C.G. Venkateshamurthy, Director CIL, dear colleagues, former directors, former deputy directors, former senior faculty of CIL, my dear staff of CIL, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to everyone. It is indeed both an honor and a privilege to stand before you today and welcome you to this event. I am delighted to welcome you here to the virtual gathering to celebrate the 53rd Foundation Day of the Central Institute of Indian Languages. The CIL, set up in 1969, is one of the unique institutions of the world that functions through different language and linguistic schemes to identify the similarities among the different Indian languages or mother tongues in terms of their histories, literatures, linguistic structures, vocabularies, cultural studies, etc., and contribute to the development of all Indian languages, both big and small ones. During the last 52 years of its existence, CIL serves as a nucleus for research and literary output. It is a clearinghouse of information in all matters related to the development of Indian languages in our nation and abroad. It was one of the first few institutions that pioneered in language documentation and produced materials on tribal and border languages, promoted non-state languages like Urdu and Sindhi, and is promoting second language teaching in the nation for more than 5 decades. It also advises the government of India for balanced language planning. Of course, it does much more. CIL completed its 52 years of journey successfully as the only institution in India devoted purely to linguistics and language education. And today we are here in a festive mood to welcome the 53rd year. We are indeed very fortunate to have with us today our founder director, Professor Patnaik, Padma Shri Awardee, and former additional secretary, the then MHRD Government of India, and chairman, Institute of Odia Studies and Research. Dr. Patnaik, who turned 91 years a few months back, is a legendary figure in linguistics and in the history of the CIL. It's always a great pleasure to see him, both face-to-face and virtually, and hear from him. His efforts need no introduction. It was under his able directorship, CIL attained greater heights and gained international reputation. Many of us were groomed by him. Dr. Patnaik, as he is fondly referred to and addressed to by his colleagues, is one of the trendy, easygoing personalities I have come across in my life. He's a man of distinct vision, a fountainhead of illuminating ideas, an idol of knowledge and experience and inspiration to all of us. His tripartite personality as an able administrator, productive researcher, and lively human being is something adorable. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, quote, "The great teacher is not the man who supplies the most facts, but the one in whose presence we become different people." Unquote. This is true of Professor Devi Prasanna Patnaik. Sir, words are not enough to talk about you. Nevertheless, I want to say a few words about you here in this August gathering and once again extend our warm welcome to you. On behalf of our institute, the director, and my personal behalf, I extend a heartfelt warm welcome to you, sir. Your virtual presence here this morning is a source of inspiration for us and a great moral booster to the entire CIIL and Indian linguistic community. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to be the chief guest on our Foundation Day. My warm welcome to Srimati Suman Dikshit, Deputy Secretary, Ministry of Education, Department of Higher Education, Government of India. Madam, it is indeed lovely to see you today amidst us on this great occasion as a guest of honor. Sumanji, it's so nice of you to spend your Saturday morning with us. Thanks for being with us. We are looking forward to hear from you. The 53rd Foundation Day is being celebrated on a grand scale with full zeal and enthusiasm, despite this pandemic, which has disrupted many of our lives. The planning started only 3 weeks back when Mysuru was still under lockdown. We have come out with launching 2 major events, Foundation Day lecture series and consultative meet on language education. These will be held from today till perhaps January 2022 with a series of academic events. So far, 25 scholars across all the continents have given their consents to deliver lectures virtually. To start off, we have the Foundation Day lecture by Professor Nicholas Evans, Director ARC, Center of Excellence for the Dynamics of Language, Australian National University, Australia. Nick Evans, one of the top field linguists of the world, is here with us to grace this occasion as a guest of honor and deliver the inaugural lecture today. A hearty welcome to Nick on behalf of the Institute and on my own personal behalf. Nicholas Evans is a distinguished professor in linguistics who is known for his work on Aboriginal languages of Australia. He is an awardee of the Australian Laureate Fellowship. In 2013, he was awarded the prestigious fellowship by the Australian Research Council. A recipient of Ken Hale Award from the Linguistic Society of America, his book, Dying Words on Indigenous Languages, has been translated into many languages of the world. Nick is not new to CIIL. He was the keynote speaker in the International Conference on Tense Aspect and Modality in 2012, which was organized by the CIIL and Northeastern Hill University, Shillong. He was also a keynote speaker of the Linguistic Society of India Conference in 2013 in Kerala, that was jointly organized by the CIIL and University of Kerala and the LSI. He's a good friend of the Institute, and he never says no to us. I think it's his admiration for CIIL that made him accept even this request in just 4 minutes after I approached him over WhatsApp. Thank you very much, Nick. We are indeed honored and very much privileged to have you with us. I once again welcome you on behalf of the Institute and on behalf of the director. Any event of this magnitude needs support from the organization, especially the head of the institution. We are very happy that Professor C.G. Venkateshmurthy not only supports us in organizing this event, but also by being one of those Mysoreans who has seen the tremendous growth of CIIL. He encouraged us to plan the celebrations of the 53rd Foundation Day virtually in a very grand manner. He has not stopped us from doing anything the committee wants to do. So thank you very much for being who you are. A hearty welcome to you, Professor Muthi, the president of this event. We have with us today many of our former directors, Professors Udaynarayana Singh, Rajesh Deva, Avadesh Mishra, perhaps Professor Annamalai will watch this tonight, Indian time, and morning for him on the YouTube. Professor Ramasamy, many former deputy directors, former colleagues who are perhaps watching this on YouTube or Facebook. I welcome you all and thank you for accepting our invitation to be with us today on this important day. You are our family, and we would be nothing without you. I also welcome my dear colleagues, both academic and non-academic staff from the Central Institute of Indian Languages and the 7 regional language centers. Without you, this event would not be meaningful. I welcome each and every one of you present here in the virtual media and also the press, people who have assembled here in the conference hall of the Central Institute of Indian Languages, and some of the media persons who are already watching it on YouTube or other social media. I thank all of you who chose to be with us on a Saturday morning. With these few words, let me once again welcome you all to this event and hope that you will enjoy celebrating the Foundation Day of the great institution, the Central Institute of Indian Languages, with us. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, madam, for your warm welcome address. On this momentous occasion, it is our great privilege and pleasure to invite the founder director of CIIL Mysuru, Professor Debi Prasanna Patnaik, the chief guest of today's program, to address the gathering. A renowned linguist and scholar of international reputation, he stands tall amidst the galore of linguists, language educationists, and other academicians. Sir, may I invite you to enlighten us?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Thank you, thank you. ज्येष्ठ श्रेष्ठ वरिष्ठ कनिष्ठ सबको प्रणाम. My obeisance to everybody present in this webinar. I am grateful to the director and all the members of the organizing committee of the 53rd Foundation Day celebration of CIIL for inviting me to participate in the celebration. Of 17 July 1969, when I attended the inaugural ceremony of the CIIL at Mysore, Professor V.K.R.V. Rao, the Union Education Minister, inauguratory, and Dr. K.L. Srimali, predecessor, and the then Vice Chancellor of Mysore University, presided. When I joined Mysore, the only guideline I had was the performance budget which I had submitted, on the basis of which the Departments of Finance and Expenditure to the Ministry of Education. The greatest challenge was to learn and to put to practice and to perform. In collaboration, initiated production of language laboratories in the country. The BEL undertook the production. In collaboration with Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, we offered the first course in computational linguistics in the country, CIIL, of which I was a member of the Central Committee program of corpus production in Indian languages. I became member of Board of Governors of all Central Language Institutes, the Government of India, Hindi and Sanskrit. We strengthened linguistic component of all the institutes and emphasized the teaching learning perspective of the respective languages. In collaboration with the Central Sanskrit Institute, volumes entitled Sarala Sanskritam and Samanvita Sanskritam. We initiated a series of Hindi Indian language bilingual common vocabulary series, Hindi Telugu, Hindi Tamil, Hindi Kannada, Hindi Malayalam, Hindi Kashmiri volumes. There was complaint that we are doing the work of the Hindi Institute. We stopped work and the project ended. The Institute had neither the interest nor the competence at that time. I persuaded the CIFL to undertake two projects, English for special purposes. They finalized English 120 for taxi, auto drivers, and for coolies in railway stations. I asked them to prepare an English 400-hour course, equivalent to English from standard 1 to 10. In spite of pressure from Mr. Narasimha Rao, who was our minister, whom I knew from the days he was a minister in the Andhra cabinet, they delayed it for 3 years and finally sold it to an African country. When pressure mounted, OUP published and priced it at 4,000 a set. I understand now it is published by Orion Black Swan and sold at 8,000 a set. After 2 years, the project of 4 regional centers was handed over to the CIIL. I had contended that India was a multilingual country and all states were multilingual. The center and state must cooperate and collaborate to solve their language problems. The states should depute teachers to learn a language other than their state language. Once they complete the 1 year diploma course, go back and teach that language. The CIL shall reimburse funds equivalent to 2 annual increments. The centers must take the student teachers for a month-long cultural tour to the states concerned. This project not only enhanced fraternity among teachers and students, a byproduct was translation. The new language learners translated books from the learned language to their regional language or vice versa. Material production was another training ground for the teachers of the centers. Using new methods, basic, intermediate, and final course materials were prepared, which are tried out. Eventually, the 4 centers became 7. Around 73-74, I received direction from the Prime Minister's Secretariat to duplicate the language learning facilities available at the CIL school at Masudi. To create the infrastructure was relatively easy. The school authorities complained that they did not have the means to appoint 14 teachers. They agreed with my suggestion to appoint 7 bilingual teachers. I recommended the first batch of 7 teachers and the program began with them. Considering that in the multilingual context, local languages need protection as well as propagation, the CIL participated in the literacy programs. Besides supporting literacy programs in Karnataka and Maharashtra, it produced literacy instructional material in Assamese and Manipuri. Our literacy work was so comprehensive that the Government of India gave the Jawaharlal Nehru Literacy Award to me. Since CIL was the apex body of the Government of India in the area of language, it was necessary that it keeps itself abreast of language problems in states. Whenever I visited state headquarters, Minister, Chief Secretary, and Secretaries of Education and Culture, my deputy directors used to meet, the additional secretaries, joint secretaries, newspaper representatives, and the principals of centers used to meet directors of education, culture, and tourism in the states. We had all the information about language use and misuse in states. Whenever there are language-related questions in the parliament, to dictate answers over phone. Whenever there was an issue of language conflict, it was referred to us. Before joining CIIL, I was known among the literatures of the country because of my career at Vishwabharati. The chairman of the Odisha State Gyanpit Committee and member of the Central Gyanpit Award Committee. Following the recommendation of Dr. Karan Singh, the rules were modified to give me a second term in the Central Award Committee. I was known among the scholars of humanities and social sciences of the country because of my career in the American Institute of Indian Studies. This gave me the opportunity to 24 countries around the world study the language related activity in those countries. Because of my research and publication, I was known among linguists of the world. All these came in handy in setting up the CIIL. I always thought that should equally be known in their fields. Then only CIIL can remain in the apex. I had MA in Odia and MA PhD in linguistics. During my PhD at Cornell, I did MA level courses in anthropology. I have a 3-year diploma in French. My PhD thesis is the first of its kind among Indo-Aryan languages and to be published by Mouton Haig. I wrote the first book on applied linguistics in the country. I am convinced that the faculty of CIIL should be nationally and internationally known scholars in their disciplines with proven competence in linguistics. Linguistics or applied linguistics should be the preferred competence. I have received lots of love and affection from the peoples and governments of the country. In the 8th Kalamela, organized jointly by the state and central academies at Mysore, I was honored as one of the 16 eminent Karnatikas of the time. I, along with Bhupen Hazarika, who subsequently was awarded Bharat Ratna, was specially honored by the Assam Sahitya Sabha. I was given the State Award of Himachal Pradesh, the only one of its kind in the whole country. The honors, awards, rewards, and recognitions I have received from different parts of the country are recognition of the CIIL. I received the absolute confidence of the central and state governments. The central government asked the Sindhi delegation from Mumbai to meet me and find a solution to their problem. My minister invited me to sort out an interpersonal problem in the ministry arising out of a language issue. Himachal Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala had invited me to sort out problems in their states. The Prime Minister's office entrusted me the Bodo language problem and the language problem of Tripura to find solutions. Their confidence was so absolute, the Chief Minister had been advised to accept whatever solution I found. The history of the CIIL has not been written. The approaches and pathways are not the same as in the West. But modern tales about sociology is true of linguistics in India. I quote, succeeding generations have condescendingly neglected the work of their predecessors. Unquote. Dear modern sociological tradition, my personal success is the success of the CIIL. The language policy and planning I wrote on the eve of the fifth plan was well received. Towards a national book policy which I wrote for the government of India for submission to the UN brought encomiums from the UN. In the government of India, the, uh, uh, the UN told that such a report had not been written by any other country. in the language planning conferences on Africa by the UN in Germany, France, and Malay resulted in my invitation by President Nelson Mandela to help them in the preparation of language policy for South Africa, which brought credit to the government of India. So did my participation in the 11-member UN Commission, of which India was a member, to discuss the report of the Bilingual Bicultural Commission of Canada and find ways and means to prevent the partition of Canada and Quebec. India has done sufficient work and acted as the leader and spokesperson of the third world in the UN. The government of India has done sufficient work to build bridges among the center and the states within the country, nurtured and continued. In spite of such glorious tradition, the CIL has been permitted to degrade and linguistic studies have been permitted to decline in the country. Uh, the CIL, which is a subordinate office of the ministry, is now sought to be converted into a central university. No central university can fulfill the mandate of the CIL. No university can solve language problems across states. No university can even implement a program within a state. There are universities centered by the states and there are also private universities. They have their own procedures. There are also fake universities. The UGC has a list of fake universities. No step has been taken to close them down. The NAC evaluate the university as the criteria of publication. Everybody knows that there are predator journals which prepare and publish papers on payment. The UGC has a list of predator journals. The CIIL has a mandate which is different from all the universities and institutions. Uh, the government has converted the CIFL into a central university. The government has created many Sanskrit universities. The results are evident. Not a single university in India has Center for Study of Munda and Sino-Tibetan linguistics. Even for Indo-Aryan and Dravidian, there is no center, not to speak of comparative and historical linguistics. Dwindled over the years. No central or state university can solve this problem. If the government doesn't want to retain CIL as a department, other alternatives are available. One has to look for them. When there is the greatest need of interdisciplinary and intercultural studies of social sciences with linguistics as the centerpiece, degradation of the CIL is bound to destabilize education and communication. I hope I have told you about my experience in the CIL and the development of the CIL over the years. I I hope that you will all be happy with the manner in which we developed and the confidence we got from the national and international community. Thank you very much. Namaste. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your inspirational speech and for taking us through the journey of CIIL since its inception. The presence of Professor Devi Prasanna always reminds us the humble beginning of CIIL. William Shakespeare has rightly said that the world is a stage where every man and woman comes and play their own parts. Everyone has their exits and entrance. Likewise, Professor Devi Prasanna, along with many others, has envisioned and set a stage for many of us, especially for the linguist community. Everyone who has worked or have worked here, whether linguist or otherwise, have our own roles to play. We once again thank him for his presence and also paving the path for each one of us. Thank you, Professor Devi. Moving on next, we are very happy to have with us Srimati Suman Dixit, Deputy Secretary, Ministry of Education, Government of India, as our guest of honor today on today's program. I, with utmost respect, invite and request you, Madam, to kindly share some of your thoughts with us. Madam, kindly take your time.
Good morning to all of you. Am I audible?
Yes. Yes.
Esteemed guest present in this event, our founder director of the institute, our present director, Professor Murthy, all academic officers and staff of the institute. I welcome you all and I congratulate you all on this Foundation Day celebration of CIIL. It is indeed a great pride that CIIL has rendered 53 years of glorious service to the nation. The Central Institute of Indian Languages was established with the goal of serving the language need of the nation. I feel great pleasure in sharing with you the importance of language. We get to know from our Vedic scriptures that the first tangible element that was produced for the material creation was sound, shabd. Then from sound comes the ether, the sky. Then from sky comes the air, then the fire, then water and the earth. It is also stated in the Vedanta Sutra that sound is the origin of all objects of material possession. And language is expression of words and sounds. Moreover, language is also a vital part of all human connections. It allows us to share our ideas, our thoughts. It is only through language we express and share our love, our care, our heartfelt feelings, and we develop and we nourish, maintain our relationships. So it is really a privilege that we are working for the development of language, which is so vital and important in all respects. CIIL is working for last 53 years to cater to various needs of language development, and it has achieved several milestones. CIIL has established various regional centers, classical language centers. It has launched various prestigious schemes and projects. It has prepared several study materials in multiple languages. It has undertaken intra-linguistic studies. So it has come a long way. We know India is a diverse country where languages from 5 languages families, and there are so many languages are spoken in India. Despite there are so many languages, there is similarity. That is our unity in diversity. And we love to learn each other's language. We respect all languages and we love to learn each other's language. That is our privilege. And for this purpose, we have, the Government of India has launched a flagship program, Ek Bharat Shreshtha Bharat, as you are aware, in which we pairs 2 states so that they come to know about each other's language and each other's state's language and its culture. And CIIL is making great effort in this direction for achieving the desired result from this program. I have also come to know that we have completed 50 years of our 4 regional centers. It is a great pride. We have served the nation for 50 long years. The regional language centers are established with the goal of teaching Indian languages to second language learners, especially the school teachers, who would propagate it further to the masses. These RLCs have served this goal so far by imparting training to tens and thousands of trainees. This needs to be even done to be at greater number. Then that 22 scheduled languages of India need to be taught with greater resource. More research needs to be done on them so that they come at par with other similar languages of the world. You know, the new education policy 2020 focuses more on mother tongue education. And CIL has a great role to play even here by way of coordinating between different languages institutions, state governments, educational institutions, other organizations working in the area. The RLCs of CIL have an important role to play towards implementation of national education policy also. The schemes of CIL with National Translation Mission, National Translate Testing Services, Linguistic Data Consortium for Indian Languages were established with the visionary goals and have done a fairly good job in the past. But there is tremendous potential which needs to be explored yet. These schemes are fairly good. They can do wonders to the society. The institute is also working on various projects for development of our classical languages of Kannada, Telugu, Odia, Malayalam. These classical languages are not just languages. Actually, these are much more than languages. Through these languages, we can connect with our ancient India, its values, our culture, our cultural heritage. Therefore, much more needs to be done through these classical languages centers to preserve our ancient culture and our heritage. No doubt in these 53 years, CIL has come a long way in the promotion of all languages. And I am sure CIL will achieve much greater heights. We need to be more focused to our goal so that we can come over all the challenges and distractions. On this opportunity, I once again congratulate the director, all the staff, all the officers, and all the people who have been associated with CIL in these years. And I take this opportunity to pray to the Supreme Lord Krishna that He showers His mercy and gives us wisdom, intelligence, strength, so that we can better serve the Institute for the welfare of the people of the country and masses at large. Thank you so much. I'm so feel so delighted to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your lovely speech, madam. And even thank you for acknowledging the achievement work of CIL for Indian languages. As you have rightly pointed out, that CIL portrays unity in diversity of India. Thank you once again, madam. Moving to the next part of the program, ladies and gentlemen, we rarely get this kind of opportunity to listen to the words of great linguists like Professor Nicholas Evans. Professor Evans will enlighten us on the topic Parliament of Tongues, the challenges of fragile linguistic diversity in the 21st century. Sir, I request you to appear on screen, please.
Can you see me? And can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can see you.
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
I'm just going to get my PowerPoint up. I hope it's going to function. One moment. Put it on screen view. I'm sorry for this. I'm just shrinking it a little bit. Now, are you Are you seeing my screen now? Should come up.
Yes, we can
Yes.
see it.
It's
Yes, we are beginning to see it. Yeah.
The only trouble is I can't see it myself. Share. Okay. Well, I hope that's going to work. So first of all, look, a really big thanks. I'm so honored by this invitation, and I would like to thank Uma for inviting me, and I would also like to pay my respects to Professor Patnaik, who I had the very good fortune to meet on one of his visits to Australia, and to my many other dear colleagues there in the Indian linguistics community, my very warm regards from Australia at this moment. And also, I salute you for your courage in organising this in the middle of this terrible pandemic. And I'm so sorry that I can't be there in person to meet you all. I'd also like to acknowledge from where I am here that I am presenting this from the country of the Ngunnawal Nation in Canberra, and to acknowledge that they have never ceded ownership of this country to the British invasion, and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Now, this talk is going to be in 3 parts. In the first part, I want to just have a brief overview of the world's fragile linguistic diversity. It's a problem that faces us right around the world, that concerns us here in Australia. It's been part of my own career, and I know that many scholars in India also have. And right around the world, there's a huge amount of work going on, but it's a terrible race against time, and we need to draw on the full range of human ingenuity and passion and commitment to address it. In the second
Nick, one moment. Nick,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
Can you make your screen full screen? Can you press the button?
I'll try doing that, see if that's better. One moment. How's that for you now?
No, don't drag it. I just want you to press the full screen button.
Yeah, I did. It's not full screen for you now?
I think it's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's fine. All
Yeah.
right, go ahead. Yeah,
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So, then in the second part of the talk, I want to talk about some particular research questions in the study of Aboriginal languages, which I hope you will find interesting because they have wider implications. And then in the third part, I will close with some brief remarks about how I, as an outsider, see the very special role of CIIL, looking back on its first 53 years, and I hope to many centuries more, if I can say that. Now, let's just start with one particular language and one particular person that I worked with. This language is from Northern Australia and is known as Margu. And when I began working up there in the 1990s, I did a little bit of work with a couple of old people who said, look, we can't really speak the language anymore. You just got here too late. And then I looked in archives held in Canberra, sound archives, and found about 6 hours of recordings made in the early 1960s. They were just tapes with a little bit of information, not even the metadata about speaker names. It just said Margu, and it gave the dates and the name of the recorder. So I played these back to these 2 old men who were the last, seeming to be the last speakers. They were old. They weren't in as good physical or mental condition as Professor Patnaik, unfortunately, even though they were younger than him. But they said, look, we can't understand that. I don't know what those people are saying. So I thought, well, if these people who are the last speakers can't even understand it, there's not much I can do. And as you will know, if you've ever tried to transcribe a passage in a language that you don't know, you can't really do it. You can't just hand it over. You have to learn a language in order to transcribe it. And then one time I was up there, it was the rainy season, the monsoon, and I thought, look, I'll just sort through and try and find the one that sounds the clearest to me, even though I can't understand it. So I found this, there was about 15 minutes spoken by a woman, and I was working by this woman who you can see here in the blue shirt, and now deceased. Her name is Joy Williams, on another language called Iwadja. And I just thought I would play it to her. And so I did. And she burst into a mixture of crying and laughing. And she said, look, that's my mother talking. I can understand every word that she says. Because although Joy couldn't speak the language anymore, she could still understand it. And her mother had repeated these things to her many times. And by working with Joy, we were able to go through that passage and eventually transcribe it. And so it comes out as, etc. And to translate it. And this is her mother here, the only surviving photograph we have of her. Her name was CIIL Overview, photograph from the 1940s. And in it, she talks about how everyone has gone who spoke the language. It's just her left who could speak. Margot, the old people have died. I'm the only one sitting here talking. And of course, since then, CIIL Overview has passed away herself. So that's one of the world's 7,000 languages that has left this earth in the last decades. And there are many hundreds, probably thousands more in the same situation in every part of the world. In some areas, languages are going faster than others, but basically it's a global problem. We know that in India, many languages are being lost. I just put this one example from Great Andamanese because Professor Anvita Abi has done such wonderful work with her team on recording it, and this is just one of many publications that she and her team have done. But it's such a fascinating and beautiful language. It's a tragic loss to humanity when languages like this disappear. And of course, the seeds for the problem are often sown 50 or 60 or 70 years ago, or maybe even further, when people are maybe denied the possibility of speaking the language, told that it's a stupid or primitive tongue, maybe physically punished or mentally punished for speaking it, or maybe simply dispersed, or else they lose their environment. Many reasons can cause it. Now, this is a map I like to show that shows the world. You will have seen maps like this where countries are scaled according to their population or according to their gross national product. Here, countries are scaled according to what we can call their gross linguistic product. That is the number of languages intrinsic to that country. And you can see that India, as we would expect, is one of the giants, but so are some that you mightn't quite expect. So Papua New Guinea here, which only has about 10 million people living in it, is the country with the most languages in the world, close to 900. And countries like Nigeria and Cameroon and Indonesia is the country with the second most languages. These are where there is so much. Mexico also, and some other countries as well. And what's striking about this map is if you look at these countries like Papua New Guinea or Nigeria, Cameroon, most of these are countries without a lot of good educational, or technological infrastructure. So India is, at some sense, at the intersection as a country with an immense number of languages, but also a very long tradition of linguistic research and cutting edge technology in many ways. And that is one of the things that gives CIIL its special mission. This is another way of looking at the problem, that is to rank countries by diversity, and I've done it in 3 ways. This first column here is just the number of endemic languages, languages that are from the place. And Papua New Guinea, as we just saw, it tops the rankings, then Indonesia, then Nigeria, then India. Actually, Australia is quite high, thanks to the many indigenous languages here that I'll be talking about later on, and then Mexico, then Cameroon. Another way of looking at it linguistically is to look at how many linguistic lineages there are. So if we do it this way, for example, all the Indo-Aryan languages in India will count as one lineage. All the Dravidian languages will count as another lineage. All the Austroasiatic languages, so both the Munda languages, but also Khasi and so on, will count as another lineage, and isolates will also count as lineage on their own. So possibly Nahali would be in that. So on that count, India is still high, but not as high, because languages tend to be in families in India. And here, the USA actually jumps up a long way because of the huge number of unrelated families. Papua New Guinea and Indonesia still stay very high up, and so on. And in this third column, which has nothing to do with language, it's a measure of biological diversity. That is the number of higher vertebrate species. We can measure that by different biological methods, but this is one. Australia, Mexico, Brazil, and India is also there in 7th position. So on all of these counts, India is a giant of diversity, and there are, a number of countries which face the problem in a particularly acute form. Some of them quite small countries, like Vanuatu, which is 12th rank here by endemic languages, but which has a population of only 250,000. This is tiny. This is like a quarter of the population of Mysuru. And there's about 130 languages in Vanuatu, probably 137, as well as English and French, because it was a condominium colonized by those 2 countries, and Bishlama, which is the national Creole, which gives you around 2,000 speakers per language. It's quite a phenomenal level of linguistic diversity in Vanuatu, although the languages are all quite closely related. So in terms of that second measure, phylogenetic diversity, it's not so diverse. Now, I want to just talk briefly about what fragile languages can tell us about. I've written at more length about this in my book, Dying Words, Endangered Languages and What They Have to Tell Us, which I'm currently revising for a 2nd edition with a nicer title, which is Words of Wonder. So as linguists, we're interested in what languages can tell us about the variability of language itself. As people who are interested in how language shapes us, our ways of thinking, but also how it reflects the cultures that we come from, this tight interweaving is a fascinating topic. It can tell us about deep history. It can take us way beyond written history to recover many details of the human past. It is the vehicle for transmitting biological and ecological knowledge, and I'll say quite a lot about that in a moment. And it can also tell us what people create with language and in language through poetry, through epics, through jokes and proverbs and all of those other things, which are the mark of specially gifted users of language. So let's take an example from history, and I just want to use the example of the migrations of the Roma, or sometimes called gypsies, who, unlike the Jews, were not people of the book. The Jews have their history written down for several thousand years. For the gypsies or the Roma, that's not the case. And the very name gypsy in English, which is a corruption of Egyptian, shows that at least speakers of English were completely wrong about where the gypsies came from. They thought they'd come from Egypt. But we know originally just from linguistic evidence, although we've now supplemented that with evidence from genetics, that they originated in central India, and it's actually an Indo-Aryan language, even though it's spoken right across Europe and has been for a very long time. But not only do we know that, we also know where they stopped along the way and when they stopped at these places. You can see that they started off in central India, then moved to the north in Kashmir, basically, where they were in contact with the Dardic languages, so-called. Then they were in contact with Persian, having moved west to Iran. But we know that happened before the Islamicization of Iran, because they didn't get Arabic loanwords. They only got Persian, ancient Persian ones. They then passed through the Caucasus. They picked up Kurdish and Armenian and Georgian loanwords. They spent a time in Anatolia when it was a Greek-speaking area, before Turkish had arrived there. And then they went into the Balkans and picked up words from Balkan Slavic languages like Croatian. And from there, they fanned out across Europe. And the different tribes, the different Gypsy or Roma tribes, speak languages that are localized, but at that point, there's no longer a common inheritance, apart from what they'd gained before reaching the Balkans. So here on this table, I don't know how well you can see it, but I'll just read out a couple of examples. There are words illustrating the fact that there's a lot of Indic vocabulary. So the word for three, for example, in Romani is trin, which you will know from Sanskrit trini, and five is panch, which will be completely familiar to you, and shtar for four from chatvaras in Sanskrit, and so on. Then there are lots of Persian words. For example, if I just give you the word khair for donkey, which comes from Persian khar, and then there's lots of words from the southern Caucasus. So the word bov for oven from Armenian bov, and the word kila for plum from Georgian kliavi. And then in Anatolia, there are lots of words from Greek, like foro, town, from foros, market in Greek, and drom, road. They talk about the lungo drom, the long road, which they followed, and then some words from the Balkans. So this is a very detailed picture we can build up of the Roma migrations, thanks to the fact that the language has carried forward these clues for thousands of years. It's not as if speakers deliberately were carrying this information. It's just by speaking the language, it's been passed on, and by using the right linguistic tools, we are able to recover this information. Now, languages also transmit information about the natural world. And in this time of terrible ecological crisis, when human beings are becoming aware how much damage we have done to the world we live in and how wantonly we've been consuming its resources, studying what the tribal languages around the world have to teach us is a giant source of information. I'd just like to give on this slide some examples from Soliga, spoken not far from Mysore, but on the borderline between Karnataka province and Tamil Nadu. And this is from work carried out by Ongsi, who was then my doctoral student, and despite being a Burmese national, grew up in New Delhi. So he spent a lot of time with Soliga speakers, and in this very fine book, he looks at various aspects of the traditional ecological knowledge of Soliga people. And one of the things which you can see on that page there, maybe not very well, is that the detailed knowledge of what every tree does through the seasonal round. When is it in flower? What's the situation with its bark? When a fruit's available, and so on. And for each tree species in the forest, Soliga people have this knowledge and have words for talking about it. We know it's become very clear to us through the COVID epidemic, but also through all of the other epidemics that afflict us and other diseases that afflict us, that plants are the #1 source of medicinal substances, as Ayurvedic medicine well knows. And the interesting thing is how often there is just one culture, just one language, often a small tribal culture, that possesses knowledge about a particular medicinal plant. So there was a recent study this year that surveyed what they called medicinal plant services, where there was a particular plant species and a particular medicinal subcategory. For example, certain fig species and the digestive system. They looked at 3 regions of high biocultural diversity: North America, New Guinea, and Northwest Amazonia. And from a huge survey of the scientific literature, they found nearly 12,500 such medicinal plant services across 236 indigenous languages. 75% of those were linguistically unique. That means that just one language in their sample records this connection. Now, I know that in India, you often think of so-called small languages as only having a few million speakers. But if you come to parts of the world like Australia or Papua New Guinea, a small language might have as few as 80 speakers. So we're really talking about very localized knowledge here. And we don't know where that knowledge will be. And it's so easy for it to disappear with the loss of an old lady like Hazel Mamiar or the last speakers of Andamanese and so on. So this just gives some idea of the urgency of documenting this knowledge. It means when we document a language, we're not just documenting the grammar or you know, the words for man or woman or tooth, but we need to go right down. We can't just use a questionnaire because we don't know in advance what the knowledge is. We have to use methods which go out and listen to what speakers of indigenous languages tell us, which is something I'll cover in the next section. So I now want to look at some Australian examples of what I will call indigenous metasemantics. That is, as linguists, we know about semantics, the study of meaning, but what are the words, the techniques we use to study semantics? That's metasemantics. And it's a common conceit of the literate world, of so-called civilizations, wherever they may be, that people without writing are basically leading some sort of primitive life and don't get much time to think about the higher questions of existence. And one of the things that has struck me the most in the many privileged years I have had the good luck to spend learning about certain Australian Aboriginal languages is how sophisticated people's understanding of language is and how much people talk about it and think about it at a really deep level. And I'd like to give you some sense of that in this part of the talk. You might think it's odd to invite an Australian or a specialist on Australian Indigenous languages to talk to these celebrations of CIIL, even though Professor Patnaik talked about his aspirations, which I share, for CIIL to really be a globally oriented institute for linguistics. But I'd like to signal a couple of more specific connections between Australian languages and Dravidian languages in particular. So something that's really striking, and people have mentioned this since the 1870s, is how similar the sound systems of Australian languages and Dravidian languages are. So CIIL, which is the Australian language that I was first able to learn, you can take it and you can transcribe it using phonetic symbols, which are basically Latin symbols with a few diacritics like the tooth sound, or specific variants like the r for the retroflex approximant. And you can transcribe it using the Tamil writing system. So you can choose which way to listen this, but if I say the equivalent in Kaido of he won't go back south, he'll stay here, I say Niatan Angorulunko, Danko Wirijo. I can transcribe it almost perfectly using the Tamil script. The only slight difference is that the interdental T is a laminodental th instead of an apicodental th, and that the W is really a w rather than a v. But apart from that, it works perfectly. And as well as that, the kinship systems in Australia are of what is known as the Dravidian type. So, for example, in Kaidilt, the same term, namatul, is used for your mother and your mother's sister, different from your father's sister. Same word for your father and father's brother, different from your mother's brother. In Walbury, another Australian language, there are 4 sibling terms, so older brother, younger brother, older sister, younger sister, just like in Tamil and other Dravidian languages and so on. So it shouldn't feel like a completely alien world. So in this section, there are 3 things I want to talk about. Generally, to orient you to these metasemantic traditions, to look at how what we can call multiple semiotic systems are used to investigate semantics. So these are different levels of language that operate either at different levels of abstraction or through oppositions of antonymy, of oppositeness in meaning, and then of something which relates all of this back to what the speech communities themselves want through appropriate meta-language. Now, there's a good reason why I think semantics is the most fundamental and interesting part of language to look. Because, as Leo Spitzer once said, it's in semantics that the changes due to cultural development can best be seen at work. The meaning is the best barometer of cultural climate. And in the introduction that we heard from both from Uma and from Professor Patnaik earlier on, the role of CIIL in thinking of India as a culture of shared values across shared values, shared concepts and ideas across its many languages is a central part of the founding concept. So if we start looking at Australian languages, we know that these weren't a written tradition. There aren't traditional scripts for any of them, but that doesn't mean that there's not an oral tradition of linguistic investigation. And one nice example is the fascination with metaphor and with other figures of speech that finds its way into many parts of life. And in the Yolngu languages of northeastern Arnhem Land, the term likgan, which literally means elbow, but by a fairly obvious metaphor, it also means joint or connection, that is connection between two concepts, gets used in contexts of art and ceremony. So the sorts of linguistic things we look at to investigate this are special registers, so initiation registers, respect registers, hand signs, and sand drawing and its iconography. So let's look at this quickly. This is just to give you a bit of an idea of this notion of Yolngu likgan. And I'd like to show one of the applications of this Yolngu metaphor to the bicultural encounter, which in the North Australian context is the encounter between Indigenous systems and education in mother tongue, which there means the Indigenous mother tongue, and the national language of English. So people in this area talk about the Ganma metaphor for education, and this is based on a very beautiful idea that if you look at where rivers run down and meet the incoming tide from the sea, so we have the fresh water running down here, we've got the tide coming in, and there's a particular point, say in an estuary, where the two waters meet, swirl around, mingle, create a very special sort of foam, and there are certain creatures that live just in this area. So from the Yolngu standpoint, bilingual and bicultural education isn't just about learning two tracks, but it's also about a third thing, which are the extra insights that one comes by moving back and forth between two different frameworks or perspectives. If you are a hunter-gatherer, if you live by hunting, by fishing, by reaping the fruits of the earth, you have to be very adept at reading nature. A lot of your technology is knowing how to read the very subtle signs that are out there, and the of the choir and furniture of heaven and earth being regarded by the Aborigines as a vast sign system. And this shows up at many points in the language. So people use the English to refer to two phenomena. They might be different plant species or symbiotic relations or environmental associations. Here's an example. So in Western Arnhem Land, another place I work, the language is called Gunjaitni, there is a word alyur, which has three meanings. It can refer to the lightning that's just at the beginning of the monsoon and the spirit being that goes with it. And we can find ancient rock paintings depicting this alyur spirit meaning, because people believe that lightning was created by this alyur. You can probably see on the knees are these two sort of stone axes, and they're clapped together to spark the lightning. Then there's this grasshopper here, a very rare grasshopper just found in quite a small area known as Leichhardt's grasshopper. And it's also the name of this particular plant known as Petacida epipigera, Pityrodia jamesii and Cleoma viscosa, which this grasshopper eats. And that plant is also only found in a very small area. So if you're looking for that grasshopper, you can find it by looking for the plant. and that grasshopper only appears at the time of this lightning. And people say that his beautiful coloured outfit reflects the colours of the lightning man. So each one of these things provides information about the other. Here's another example. When I was making my dictionary of CIIL language, I recorded the word jar, and it can mean foot. That's the first meaning I got, and also footprint, clear enough, and track. But then I was told it also meant rain. And I wasn't sure. I wonder if there's some difference I can't hear yet. Tried repeating it with different pronunciations. No, it sounds the same. It was a mystery to me why. And I just thought, well, it's just a coincidence, like the English word bank, like river bank or bank where you put your money and so on. However, a few years later, I came across a book by an anthropologist, Nancy Munn, on Walbury iconography. And in that book, this particular sign, which represents 4 lines drawn in the sand, gets used to refer to both track, footprint, and terrain. So I thought, something going on here. Now, as I looked into it more, people explained to me, well, it's like we live by tracks, by tracking animals in the sand or humans in the sand. And after a while, at the end of the dry season, the sand is just covered with tracks. It's confusing and hard to see what's happening, just like a blackboard at the end of the day, covered in half rubbed off writing. When the rain comes, it clears it all. And the rain is like giving us new tracks. So there is a connection there that's a very important one. But it took some time to arrive at an understanding of what that connection was. I'd now like to talk about some special uses of language that are particularly revealing. So right across Australia, there are special formal, decorous, polite ways of talking, sometimes called mother-in-law language, brother-in-law language. You use them with some category of affine with whom you need to be especially polite and circumspect. So in Gunjatmi, the language I spoke to you about before, it's called Gungur, and Gur refers to the in-law relationship. Now, in this special language, words which are much more precise in the everyday language and differentiated. So here are 3 words for different sorts of pandanus illustrated on the slide. So Gundayar is Pandanus spiralis, Manjimjim, Pandanus aquaticus, and Mangokngo, Pandanus basedowii. All of those in Gungur are Gunyaril. That's just a pandanus of any type. So sometimes we see people write a little bit disparagingly about tribal or indigenous languages around the world. Either they're accused of being too imprecise or they're accused of being too concrete, lacking in the ability to abstract. And the point is that in a language like Gunjatmi and Gungur, you can move up and down a scale from precise to abstract by moving between these different registers. And by taking a sort of whole of language approach to documenting it, we get some very potent evidence about what the conceptual groupings are that speakers use. Here's another example, also from Gungur, and this is Mick Yarmir, who was one of my teachers, and this is just the grammar of Biningunwok, which is the language of which Gunwingu and Gunjatmi are dialects, where I describe this in a bit more detail. So in European languages, if we think about ways of talking about thinking and knowing, they're predominantly linked to sight. So even words in English like wisdom and wise are related to vedere in Italian and so on, which have to do with vision. That's not the case at all in Australian Aboriginal languages. Their words about knowledge and thought relate to hearing. And here's some of the evidence for that. So if we look at the ear, the normal word for ear is gunganen. That's this part. There's also a word gunbeng, which means the inner ear, as you follow the processing of sound down into the brain. So you might say, well, they're just two different parts of the body. Who necessarily knows that these are seen as an integrated system by speakers of Biningunwok? But in the mother-in-law variety, Gungur, both are called Gunmador. I'd also like to note that if we're interested in historical studies, etymologies that trace the change from one meaning into another, a system like Gungur is very powerful as a way of showing the connections of semantic change along which words move. Now let's look at words for hearing and knowing and believing. So if I say he or she hears, I say kabekan. If I say he or she thinks or knows or believes, I say kabenga. They're different words, even though they look a bit similar. But if I go into the Gungur, the mother-in-law, I say gamarngalatne for both. That is, I represent the same, he hears and he thinks or knows in the same way, which is different to how I represent he sees. In the everyday language, that's kanan. In Gungur, that's gagurudnen. By the way, in the practical orthography we use in Australian languages, the RD and the RN indicates retroflexion, and the double R indicates a trilled R, like a R sound. Now, another semiotic or communicative system that speakers of Australian languages have at their disposal is sign languages. Now, these get used for a variety of purposes. One is that when you're hunting, they allow silent communication between the hunters so that an animal doesn't get scared. They can also be used just as an auxiliary channel for communicating while talking. And they are available for people who may be deaf, either they're born deaf or become deaf in order to communicate. It's also the case that widows are placed under a speech ban for some period after the death of their husbands, typically around a year. So during that time, they resort to the use of the sign language as their primary means of communication. So there's been some amazing recent work on sign languages across many of the Aboriginal languages of Australia. And we find that the same metaphors that we saw already show up in sign language as well. So if we look in Walbury Sign Language, we see that the signs which are enacted in the region of the ear, obviously hearing and deaf, but also understanding, unaware, being crazy, solving, forgetting, pondering, wisdom, and so on. The use of signs in the ear region corroborates this understanding that verbs of cognition are conceptualized as going through the faculty of hearing in Aboriginal languages. And the signs made in the region of the eye, blind and tears and eyelash, obviously, but also to fail to recognize someone, to grieve for the deceased, to be brave, because making eye contact with someone is a very audacious and aggressive thing to do. Now, another means of communication that I would like to mention briefly is visual art. It's been my great privilege to be involved in quite a miraculous development of art among the CIIL people, the very first people I lived among. They were, of all Australian groups, probably the group with the simplest material technology, maybe 15 named artifact types, and they didn't have a traditional system of art. If you travel to Western Arnhem, for example, there are long traditions of rock painting and bark painting, complex body decorations, and so on. None of that existed among the CIIL people. But that's not to say that there weren't systems of learning to see in a particular way. Because as I said, to live as a hunter-gatherer, you have to be alive to all sorts of subtle things that are happening around you. Now, when I made a dictionary of CIIL, I already mentioned this, another word that puzzled me was the word mulji. And it can mean a hole in a net or an artifact. That's one meaning. But it can also mean rough water that shows the presence of dugong or fish, and a school of fish, dolphins, and so on. When I made the Dictionary of CIIL in 1992, I couldn't see any defensible connection between these meanings, and I just treated them as separate entries. And one role for language documentation anywhere, including CIIL, obviously, is to create dictionaries. And it's a very complex task, because you need to know what are the meanings as they are perceived by speakers of the language. It's not enough just to look at their translation equivalents. Now, this lady here, Sally Gabori, is one of about 6 CIIL women who started painting in their 70s. And these were people who had no literacy at all, couldn't sign their name, who had no art in their lives. That picture there's a bit misleading because that shows her now in her 70s, but until that point, she lived in bare walls, and for much of that time just in wind shelters on a beach. And suddenly, about the age of 75, she took up painting, and she's now deceased, but her works that she produced in the last 10 years of her life are so astonishing that her paintings are hanging in art galleries in New York and Paris and in the Queensland High Court, and will greet you if, as I hope many of you will when this epidemic comes, if you come to Australia and come through the international airport in Brisbane, you'll see a huge painting that she did. At her first exhibition, this was one of the paintings that was exhibited with the name School of Mullet, mullet being a fish. And the instant I saw that painting, I understood what was going on with Mulji. Here we have her view. That's not how a Western artist would paint a school of fish, but she is painting all of those circular disturbances on the surface of the water made as fish come to the surface. And you can see very well how similar this is to a fishing net with its holes. So with that one visual metaphor, that one painting, all of a sudden a lexicographic conundrum was solved. I'd like to look at a semantic challenge now. if you read a textbook in linguistics about semantics and you look at the issue of antonymy, opposite meanings, you'll be given some nice examples like big and small and so on. They're all easy. But what none of the textbooks tell you is, how far does it go? That's the sort of question a first-year student might ask you. Sir, does every word have an antonym? And I defy you to find a semantics textbook that asks that question. We deal with a small set of antonyms and then we stop. But the Walbury people have an initiation language called Diliwiri, which takes the antonymic principle, the opposite principle, to its extreme. What happens when you become an initiated man in Walbury is that you have some physical trials, you're circumcised, you're sub-incised, which is a more radical and painful procedure I won't go into. You're scarified, you have scars, you maybe have a tooth taken out, whatever. But you also have intellectual and cosmological training. Until you've passed that, those exams, oral exams, you're not a full man and you can't marry. And you can only do this through extensive metasemantic analysis. So to become an adult in this society, even though there aren't formal universities, there are cultural steps you have to go through. So basically, to learn this language called Diliwiri, you have to be able to generate antonyms for every word in the language. So to give you just one example, in ordinary Walbury, to say I am sitting on the ground, I would say Ngajokana Walyanga Ninami. I ground on sitting am or something. But to express that in Diliwiri, I say Gariga Ngoronga Karimi. Literally, another person is standing in the sky. So I've substituted the other for I, I've substituted sky for ground, and I've substituted stand for sit. And we have to take this same principle right through the vocabulary. So deaf, eaglehawk, plains kangaroo, on and on you go. I refer you to that beautiful article by Ken Hale if you would like to find out more about this. Another group, the Lardil people of Mornington Island, who Ken Hale also worked with, had a different sort of semantic training for their second degree initiates. Their special auxiliary languages called Damin, which means means of inquiry. And according to tradition, it was attributed to an ancestor known as Kaltar, which is a yellow trevally fish. It's got lots of unusual sounds, some of them not found in any language of the world, but I'm not going to focus on them. I'm going to focus on its meaning, its semantics. So here's the challenge this time. What is the alphabet of human thought? This is a quest that goes back a long way. I have to apologize. I'm sure there's been a parallel quest in the Indian tradition for this, but I'll just mention the Western tradition, going back to a thinker called Ramon Llull, a Catalan thinker, and on through Descartes and Leibniz. The quest was for what are the basics in terms of which everything else can be expressed, just as a chemist seeks the atoms in terms of which all molecules, all substances can be composed. We can see Chinese radicals in the Chinese writing system as a written version of this. So we have radicals like this one for a person and so on, and this one for hand. But The problem with these is that only about 17% of Chinese characters are composed on purely semantic principles. So we have some which are simply pictograms, like, for example, this one where you put moon, so sun with moon to get bright, or this one where you put woman under a roof to get peace, or this one where you put a mother and child to get love. But most Chinese characters aren't like that. You have to combine a meaning element with a sound element. So they don't effect a complete semantic decomposition of all the concepts which we as human beings want to express. Well, where in the world has that been done? In the dust of Mornington Island in Queensland by a tribe of about 350 half-naked people with a very primitive technology. It's important to say these things because it helps us overcome our arrogance as people from a literate culture that people, so-called illiterates, don't also engage in deep philosophical inquiry. Because Damien has come closer to this, to solving this problem than any other human philosophical inquiry has. So this is how Damien works. As I said, it has some strange sounds because it's supposed to sound like a fish. So to say I will eat fish in ordinary Lado language, I say Narajedo Yago. If I said in Damien, I say Nadidido Ingor. You'll recognize that the is a click sound and it's a so-called ingressive lateral fricative. So it's got some unusual sounds, but the interesting thing that we want to talk about today is that it has highly abstract vocabulary. It has a small number of highly abstract roots, fewer than 200, in terms of which, with a bit of supplementation by gesture, everything can be expressed. So, for example, the term mu can mean water, can mean cloud, can mean seawater, can mean blood, it can mean urine. Each of these everyday Lado words like muga, wunda, mala, ganda, galdir map onto a single Damien word. In the realm of analyzing the meaning of verbs, action words, the analysis is maybe even more impressive. So if we take all of these ordinary verbs in Lado, barki to chop, bather to bite, bunbe to blow on a fire, delde to break or finish, gele to cut or hack, giri to cut down, nather to cook or burn something. All of those are expressed by didi, which means to act upon something causing a physical change. And another slightly similar sounding word, didi, means to act upon causing a change of physical location. So entering, getting up. Sometimes there's a metaphor, speaking. That is my physical location of my ideas of passing from Australia to India, I hope, following and so forth. So Ken Hale has written that this is invisible wealth. When the first missionaries and the settler colonials in general came into contact with Aboriginal culture, they completely failed to perceive the incredible wealth of their intellectual traditions and destroyed them without even, it's not even like destroying a temple, because when you destroy a temple, you know there's a temple there that you're destroying. Here, they didn't even know it was there. And for them, they just said, well, we have to put Aboriginal people into dormitories, we have to civilize them, get them to speak English and so on, punish them for speaking their language. This was all done because the incoming British settlers saw wealth sheerly in physical terms and saw technology sheerly in physical terms. Now, I just want to close this second section on Indigenous metasemantics by confronting one more problem, that is, when we as linguists produce our descriptions, who are we doing it for, and how can we make sure that the speech communities themselves are able to access what we do? So I'd like to talk about the work of someone called Leslie Woods, she's of Ngamba ancestry. That's a language of Western New South Wales. And she herself didn't grow up speaking the language. Her grandparents had spoken it. She's interested in bringing it back. And she had at her disposal a grammar written by the linguist Tamsin Donaldson at my alma mater, the ANU, Australian National University, in 1980. And I have to say, it's a beautiful grammar. It's very sensitive, it's perceptive about the language, but it uses a lot of obscure linguistic terminology. And for members of the speech community, it's very alienating. They just look at it and they say, what does erg mean? Or what does carrot mean? Or, different glosses that are used. So Leslie has been going through, and for every grammatical term in the grammar, she's been consulting with members of her community and discussing in depth what each morpheme, each grammatical concept is, and trying to come up with terms and agree on terms which community members are happy with. So that's her project. She's using Facebook, she's using meetings and other things, and is coming up with some very interesting results. So here's just one example in Tamsin Donaldson's grammar. This is how she glossed a particular sentence, which in Ngamba would be "Natu yuang in the kara," for I want some bread. So natu is the ergative form of I, so transitive subject form. Kara is be, and then nginda means without or wanting. So it's literally I am without bread, or I am wanting in bread. And Tamsin Donaldson used the gloss caritative for that, for whatever reason. It was an appropriate Latin term, as well as some other abbreviations like CM for conjugation marker, which weren't particularly perspicuous. So this is how the glosses which Leslie Woods and her work with the Ngamba community are coming up with. So they're actually glossing the nginda as want, and instead of ergative as dua, and so forth. Now, I'd just like to finish up by talking about how I see some challenges for CIIL. Now, I have to immediately preface my remarks by saying that I'm an outsider. I don't work on Indian languages. I work in Australia. I have had the great privilege of visiting CIIL a couple of times and other institutions in India, but I really am ignorant about the situation there. So I hope you will just take these comments in the spirit of just an admiring outsider who wants to raise some very general challenges that we face, we as the world community of linguists, where every country and every institute that concerns about language needs to play its part. And I think those challenges are as acute in India as they are in Australia or in many other countries of the world. So the first has to do with description. I think it's clear that to know what's going on in a language, we need a good grammar, we need a good dictionary, we need a good text collection, the so-called Boasian trilogy, named after the great American anthropologist and linguist Franz Boas. And if we look at what was happening in India and in both CIIL and Deccan College through the 50s and 60s and 70s, there was a powerhouse humming away, producing grammatical description. So here are some figures that we put together in an article I wrote with Frank Seifert and Harold Hammerstrom and Steve Levinson. If we look at the total number of PhD grammars since 1954 around the world, number one ranked is University of Leiden in the Netherlands with 75. Berkeley is number 2, 74. Deccan College in India is equal second, I should say, 74. And then ANU, where I am, is fourth at 71. And on we go. So, you know, Deccan College is equal second. I'm not actually sure how the work there relates to CIIL. I'm assuming that there was close linkages between them because CIIL couldn't actually confer degrees, was my understanding, not being a university. But you among the audience can correct me if I'm wrong there in our discussion time. So this was pretty impressive if we take the accumulated contribution since 1954. But if we look at a more recent measure, let's just look at the last 2 decades, you can see that basically it's dropped out. Leiden is still number 1, Austin is 2, Brazil 3, La Trobe 4, Oregon 5. ANU's also dropped down the rankings a bit to number 7. But this is a worrying trend. It means that there hasn't been a continuation of this same impetus towards linguistic description in the last 2 decades that there was in the first 3 decades of CIIL and Deccan College and so on. And I think that's a real shame, and I think it's important that the next few decades see a resumption of that intense work, because there is still so much to be done there. The second point is that I think it's vital that an institution of languages engage with other fields. I read the original proposal for CIIL, which Dr. Patnaik wrote, and it's a very inspiring document and visionary document for the time it was written. And there was overt mention of other fields there, but we always need to beware as linguists. Language is so fascinating, it can colonize our whole brain. But language is too important to be left just to linguists. It interacts with so many other domains of experience. And we need to engage with many other fields: ecology, psychology, anthropology, archaeology, oral history, I should say musicology, many, many others. And the old adage of Indian origin that a grammarian is someone who rejoices more over the saving of half a vowel length than the birth of a son, that should no longer hold. Here in the 21st century, the language sciences can no longer be the preserve of what Edward Sapir called frigid, dehumanized pedants. We have to engage with many other fields, because that is what will make the whole of society see the importance of what we're doing. And that is also what is important to the people we work with, especially in so-called small languages. The third point I would like to make is the need to respect tribal or indigenous agency and knowledge. I already mentioned that as the world confronts huge environmental crises, there's growing realization how much knowledge and wisdom is held by tribal populations and transmitted through their languages. And yet these populations don't always receive due recognition from their state or federal political rulers. And there's a tendency to see so-called modern science as having all of the answers, and to allow departments of forestry or environment or whatever to make the decisions. Here in Australia, that has taken the form in recent years of the question of who does the burning off. You will have heard that we've had terrible forest fires, like many countries in the world, as the world heats up. And the question is, who has the knowledge to keep the land burned down to the right level? And we're finally and belatedly learning that Australia's Indigenous people have incredibly sophisticated systems of fire management. There are many ways in which that general model can be applied in the Indian context. But to do that, that means that CIIL cannot be simply about language, but it has to reach out beyond that to all the domains of knowledge that are transmitted through it. And it also means that when we work on languages, we can't just go in and with a questionnaire, or we can't just go and say, we want to find this out. We have to sit and listen humbly at the feet of the people we're working with to see what they are going to tell us. Because the most interesting things we will hear are the things we don't yet know to ask about, and which will come out of these dialogues. So these slides on the left, which come from Brazil, Kuyukuru language documentation, just shows there have been some incredible initiatives in Brazil, putting the power to document their language in the hands of Indigenous peoples themselves. All of this happening against the tide of horrifying things that are happening elsewhere in Brazil. And there have even been doctoral theses written on various Indigenous languages in Brazil in those languages themselves. These are all things that we need to do, and which I feel, as an admiring outsider of Indian culture, fit very much into the huge respect for the diversity of the human condition that has always marked the best that Indian civilization has to offer. And a fourth point is the need to archive. It's not enough to record and analyze material. We can go and do that as field linguists, and people have been doing that for decades, sometimes even centuries. But when we look at existing archives, we see some frightening things. We see old tapes which are going to be no longer readable in a few years, or which maybe they have been digitized, but we don't know what they represent, what they mean, who the speakers are, what the context is when they were recorded. If we think of an immense library of the world's tongues, the world's 7,000 languages, with 7,000 wings, each representing its own realm of knowledge, that is what we need to build. That's happening in some parts of the world. Here in Australia, we've got Paradisec. There's the CIIL Archive of Languages of Latin America, based in Austin, Texas. There's the Endangered Languages Archive that has been built up by the Arcadia Foundation and the ELDP initiative and some others. But I think taking on the construction of a similar archive in the Indian context is an absolute imperative. I have to confess my ignorance, and I apologize if these things are already going on, but I also think that wherever we are, they can be done better, and more needs to be done. And finally, we already heard from Dr. Padnaik that setting computational linguistics up early on as part of CIIL's brief was an early step. And in fact, the interconnections between language and computation have a longer history in India than in anywhere else. So you can see the Ashtadhyayi as the world's first compression algorithm. Sometimes that's been argued. But I think there's a real danger today that the brightest minds will go off into other fields of IT. Even if they stay in natural language processing, the money is working for Google or working with the high-tech giants on the world's large languages, and we need to find ways of bringing their talents to bear on what's sometimes called the wicked problems, the extremely difficult and challenging ones that are posed as we grapple with our fragile linguistic heritage. So creating an exciting new environment for this talent is another key challenge for CIIL. So I'd just like to conclude by saying that Foundation Day is a day to look back, to celebrate what's been achieved, but also to look forward and to dream in the most ambitious and meaningful way about what can be done in the future. So much remains to be done. CIIL was founded with big ideals, and it was founded at a time when India was charting its own unique and inspiring destiny, and that included its own linguistic destiny. So the three-language policy, for example, anticipated in many ways what's now the policy in the European Union and in other parts of the world. So that's something which was already there. If we superpose the linguistic needs of small minority populations into that raises additional complications. The challenges we've got today, they've evolved, they're different, but they're at least as varied and challenging as they were 53 years ago. So I hope that this Foundation Day will mark an auspicious moment in your quest to be a beacon for linguistic research, not just in India, but around the whole world, as was part of the original founding dream. Thank you so much for your invitation and for listening to me. And those are the people I'd like to thank.
Nick, for your illuminating lecture and for taking us into a historical journey of field linguistics from Australia to India to Africa and back to Australia. We enjoyed 3 parts of your lectures in which you focused on linguistic diversity, and the most exciting part for many of us was the second part where you talked about the indigenous metasemantics. And also for finally highlighting some of the key challenges that CIIL has to take into notice. Now we open this talk for discussion. There are a few participants in the Google Meet link. First, we will take questions and discussions from them, and then we will also address the comments and feedback on YouTube and Facebook. Tariq Khan is requested to look into the comments of YouTube and Facebook and moderate that particular part of the session. Thank you once again.
Can I start? Uma?
Yes, Professor Agnihotri, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Tariq. Thank you very much. First of all, I think all of us are beholden to you, Professor Evans, for an extremely scholarly and inspiring talk. Thank you very much. It's a brilliant talk, and I feel particularly inspired in spite of, having to connect from 3 different devices, no electricity, and changing connectivity again and again. But I could sort of listen to the whole talk. Thank you very much. Very inspired, and agree with you that And I'd like to update you on this, that linguists and the discipline of linguistics should begin to engage with other fields. I think that's a major takeaway from your talk today, and it's beginning to happen. It's beginning to happen in big ways. And certainly, equally important that we should go back to the description and archiving of languages. On that count, to the best of my knowledge, we have, India, probably I may be wrong. Maybe Professor Patnaik or others may like to correct me, but we have not been great people at archiving our knowledge in any systematic way. So to my mind, that's a kind of loophole we must acknowledge and try to fulfill. The point I wanted to request you to elaborate a little more was the whole point of endangered and threatened languages on the one hand, and the kind of description, very rich description you gave of the Gypsy language. It's the high degree of fluidity. And you see, and the kind of, what I have in my work called multilinguality, or a rich verbal repertoire of human beings. And this is not, people think India is an object of wonder. As you, I think, show very brilliantly, it is not an object of wonder. The whole world is characterized by multilinguality in one way or another. So the point I wanted you to talk about is that, yes, when a language is lost, a whole culture is lost, a whole system of knowledge is lost. But on the other hand, new systems keep emerging, new kinds of varieties, new kinds of mixed code. And I think we should pay equal attention to the two. And I'd like to hear your views on that. And yes, I propose to take it up tomorrow in my talk too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for that very important question. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that, and this basically multiplies even further our task as linguists, because I think, as I'm sure you'll agree, that if we take a language that exists at any one point, let's say a language that's spoken by a couple of old people, or a variety of Romani Gypsy spoken in a particular area, we want to know as much as we can about that as it exists now. But we also want to know, how did this evolve? How did it come about? And you heard that the center that I represent, the Center for the Dynamics of Language, one of the key principles that inform our work is seeing language as a constantly evolving system. That means trying to understand what creates language. Because for me, perhaps the most profound lesson that linguistics has to offer the world is, here we have a brilliantly efficient, well-tailored system that has evolved without any conscious planning. What Rudi Keller called an object of the third kind. It's the unintended outcome of intended intentional activity. So when we have bureaucratic planners or people who come out with MBA degrees, my apologies if there's anyone in the audience who comes from a sort of managerialist background, but my own feeling is that that's often a very good way to produce inefficient systems. And language is an incredibly well-tuned system that has evolved without conscious planning. We don't set out to create a preterite or a voicing opposition or something. We set out to convince, to amuse, to position ourselves with respect to our loved ones, and to belong to one group rather than another. These are the goals we have. And yet through that process, we create these marvelously complex and expressive tools. Now, coming back to your question about multilinguality and language contact, what is perhaps the most fascinating set of questions there is what emerges from these systems. And as you rightly point out, the emergence of new systems that's going on exactly at the time as we're losing old ones. And something which I also thought about including in my talk from the Australian continent, which I didn't, was some recent work on so-called mixed languages, which result from the intertwining of two systems, such as a Creole version of English and a traditional language, traditional Walbri or traditional Gurindji, to produce a new language which is neither one nor the other, which inherits many of the complexities of both and adds new of its own. And here we see the emergence of system from the crucible of multilinguality. And the balance of codes used in the grandparents' generation, the parents' generation, the children's generation, that shifts. Nowadays, thanks to better recording techniques, we can look at many hours, tens of hours of transcripts from each of scores of different people and really begin to understand at a fine level what's going on. So scholars like Carmel O'Shaughnessy, Felicity Meekins, Cassandra Algie, and others have been involved in that work, and I refer you to that as really exciting work. Another type of work has to do with looking at what happens with Creoles, which often have a bad reputation as a sort of simplified variety of language that's lost its expressive power. But looking at Creoles in Australia, in Vanuatu, in Papua New Guinea, we see that the things that really matter to the speakers, such as complex pronoun systems or the kinship system, they make it through to the Creole. So people often grab lexical elements from the super straight language, English in this case, and endow them with a new semantic content, grammaticalize them very rapidly so that each of those three Creoles, North Australian Creole, Bislama in Vanuatu, Tokpisin in Papua New Guinea, they each have an inclusive, exclusive distinction and a dual and a plural, which they have built entirely from English material, poured into the conceptual mold of those traditional speakers. I mean, these are just some of the examples of how we can watch the process of languages being built by looking at multilingual conversations, code switching, code mixing, and so on. So that's, I hope, the beginning of an answer to your question, at least to show that I think that it's a supremely important thing.
Thank you very much.
May I have a question,
but I'll stop. Let
okay,
others
I have a question for Professor Nicholas. I'm Rajesh Sachdeva here in Mysore. You see, I mean, to me, the discourse on endangered languages is the oldest discourse on language, because the entire science of language in India evolved for the whole purpose of safeguarding the linguistic heritage, and the entire Vedangas, the study of phonetics and etymology, and the entire the Vyakaran and everything evolved as Vedangas, as contributing towards safeguarding, with one objective of safeguarding our entire oral heritage, and centered around Sanskrit at that time, mainly as a heritage. And the entire apparatus, all knowledge systems evolved entirely for that one purpose. So So the idea of safeguarding, recognizing the variability, the vulnerability of speech over generations, the idea of coming up with pedagogy which will assist, and cultural transmission, because culture without transmission is of no culture at all. I mean, so the whole idea of transmission of those knowledge systems and empowering the people to do it, it remained sort of confined to Sanskrit and around it, and people sort of needlessly replicated the entire model into other languages. In some sense, that was the danger. In what was suitable for Sanskrit was not necessarily suitable for the next set of languages. But we did that, and we learned a bit. In CIIL, of course, the whole idea of documentation and description have been we have been doing that for ages. That's been, but one important contributing area in which CIIL has contributed is development of human resources to deal with it. So we have invested our thinking into training native speakers in undertaking up projects. Now, because we had the weakness, we could not give degrees at our time in our institute. Although we used to get in touch with other universities, and I remember when I was looking after the institute, we got people specially admitted into Deccan College from Arunachal Pradesh, that you go and take your master's degree there, because you have no native speakers who are linguists in that. So this idea of training the native speakers to become linguists in that, I think that's a very important area in which cannot be confined to the interest of any one nation or one. It's a collective joint responsibility of across the world. I mean, all of us must recognize that our destiny is interlinked, and we need to work and strive together to build this entire thing. So I think we should drop the idea of being an Indian or an Australian or a US citizen and be linguists true to the word, and bring in together this whole idea of, and I think we should work together and redesign our courses, our pedagogy, our programs, in which we sort of, and with today's technology, we must encash on the opportunities that it brings with it. And we must bring together and bring the communities from below to be very much a part of that, and diversify and redesign our entire thinking of working on language. This is my thought on this process. Yeah.
And thank you for pointing that out. And I think we're just starting to see this taking off. This has been one of the unexpected blessings of COVID, maybe, that we've had series. I know that you're starting off your own series now, which is a wonderful thing. The Abralin series that started off in Brazil last year, the Ilara series in Paris, and some others. These are all our opportunity as linguists around the world to form what we can think of as a worldwide curriculum, where wherever there's special knowledge and special abilities to teach certain things can be offered to people anywhere who are interested. And I think, offering talks is the easy part of it. Offering like really solid accreditation or this sort of profound immersion in techniques and problem solving and other things which are more easily done in a face-to-face context. I think that's the next part we have to look at solving. But I think the last 2 years has begun this unstoppable momentum in that. And so I think it would be a fantastic thing for CIIL to be part of, and you have so much to offer there.
Thank you, Professor Agnihotri, you want to ask another question?
No, I just wanted to say, I think Professor Patnaik wants to say something, but I just want to add a line that on this day, I think on this Foundation Day, all of us need to be grateful to the Central Institute of Indian Languages, which laid the foundations of different ways of looking at the language. The first school, early 70s, on sociolinguistics was organized by Professor D.P. Patnaik. And most of the people who later led the linguistics departments across the country were trained in that school, in which Gumpers and Labov, among others, were present. Similarly, major schools in phonology, morphology, syntax, language description were held at CIIL and created the foundation of linguistic inquiry in India. So I wanted to thank on this Foundation Day all the directors and particularly Professor D.B. Patnaik for doing all this for this country. And I hope it continues doing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Patnaik, please unmute yourself. Professor Patnaik, please unmute yourself first.
Dr. Patnaik, you have to unmute yourself. You're muted. Please, you have to switch the microphone. You have to turn on your microphone. Are you struggling?
Professor Patnaik, please click on the mic button on the left-hand side corner.
I think you should ask somebody, Professor Patnaik, to help you with on switching the mic on.
Pepe is there. Can you call Pepe?
In the meantime, let me compliment Professor Nicholas Evans on this wonderful, very thought-provoking and illuminating lecture. We have received a question in the YouTube comment section. I wish to read it out first before I move on to some other questions. Professor Evans, Sanjay Lenka wants to know, what relation does language have with deep ecology?
With deep ecology, is that the question? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think one type of answer has to do with the very Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Yeah, but why don't I just wait until Professor Patnaik has said his bit, and then we can return to the question.
Sure, we'll do that. Professor Patnaik, please go ahead.
No, I wanted to talk something about multilinguality. You see, in India, what is a language? We still do not know. Because Hindi is a language which constitutes of 49 different varieties, 49 different languages. They claim that they are different languages. Similarly, Odia, it has about 19 or 20 different varieties. Therefore, when we talk about multilinguality, this is one kind of multilinguality. I have always wondered about English. It has been taken for granted that English is one language. I went to London and found out that there are so many different varieties of English, Irish English, Welsh English, Scottish English, and therefore I wondered. Until that time, I also took it from. When I went to America, I found various kinds of languages. When I went to Australia, that is a different kind of English. Therefore, that is another kind of multilinguality which we have to keep in view. The third kind that I have in view is I had a student who is a Odia, who speaks Odia language. He married a Tamil girl. They worked in Calcutta and they spoke at home English among themselves, husband and wife. Therefore, and when the children were born, they kept a Hindustani ayah and they had a Gurkha security man. So the children grew up in 6 languages: Odia, Tamil, English, Bengali, Gurkhali, and Hindustani. Right from the beginning, the children had 6 mother languages. I have always contended that they had 6 mother languages. Therefore, when we speak about mother tongue, we have to keep this in view. This is another aspect of multilingualism that we have to keep in view. It is most unfortunate that in the American context, they recognized bilingualism in 1961 and multilingualism in 2010. Until that time, they didn't want to accept multilingualism. In 2007 or 8, there was a book from Harvard University which said about multiculturalism, but not about multilingualism. Only in 2010 they accepted multilingualism. Therefore, we have reached a point where we as linguists, we cannot just claim that we have all the answers and we would provide theories. No. we have to also, as you said rightly, and as you said rightly, as Agnihotra was saying, we have to learn from the people, their language. We have to find out what actually is the situation and try to see how communication takes place, how changes are taking place. Because the changes that are taking place, we had creoles, we had pidgins, which we knew were mixed languages. We had hybrid Sanskrit at one time. We called it hybrid Sanskrit, Buddhist Sanskrit. Therefore, it is not, nothing is new. But we have to discover all these things. We have to learn, and then only we can talk among ourselves as equals, not as superiors giving theories to other people who should follow those theories. That is what is happening, unfortunately, in India, that we are looking for theories only. We are not looking for our own situation. That is one of the most unfortunate things that is happening. Thank you. I wanted to bring that to your attention.
Could I just say one word in response to that, Professor?
Yes, yes.
That one of the interesting things we've begun to look at is multilingualism in small-scale communities, both in Arnhem Land in Australia and in Southern New Guinea, and very similar situations to what you described with your family, where children have 6 mother tongues, are to be found there. Because sometimes in a small group, maybe a tribe or a clan of 300 people, you have to marry outside that, which means that a husband will draw his wife from another group. It's totally accepted that the children would learn the languages of both parents, and there will likely be 4 grandparents, each speaking a different language. And as preparation for seeking a husband or a wife, people begin to study the language that might help them in their courtship. That's one more. And when I've spoken to some elderly Aboriginal people in Arnhem Land and asked them, do you know such and such a language? This might be like a man of 80 or something. He said, oh, no, I haven't started on that one yet. But that's my next one I'm going to learn now, because I've got a granddaughter or a daughter-in-law who speaks it. There doesn't seem to be any idea of a critical period. People just keep adding and adding. So another of the, I would say, inherited dogmas that we have had from 60s style linguistics, which basically comes out of a monolingual United States, is this notion of critical period. And we have to relativize that to the societies that we're looking in. It may not be true at all. It may just reflect social facts, such as the reluctance to play with or make a fool of yourself in another language that you're learning. So I think looking at multilingualism on the ground across a very broad range of types of speech community is another of the great challenges we face as linguists. Thank you.
Professor Evans, there are a couple of questions
yes.
Which have not appeared on the YouTube, but they are very linked, and I would like to read them out so that you answer them. All of them are a question that has come from my colleague Winston Cruz, and his question is how better the archiving is augmenting the linguistic data with cultural and historical documentation data from languages that we may focus on. So what I understand from his question is, like, he wants to know how good it is to describe it from linguist perspective and comparing it with other documentations that are cultural and historical. I would also like to ask a couple of questions which have concerns that are annoyingly repetitive, but they are very important also. So the first one is the need for documentation and description of languages is undeniable. But then what kind of documentation and what kind of references and models would be most suitable? The ones existing, can they serve as reference and models for language documentation and description? If so, the general people, the common man, finds it very xenoglossic in nature, right? And the second one is also an annoyingly repetitive question, that is like between description and documentation on the one hand, and teaching and learning or pedagogy of the language on the other hand. What do you suggest? What do you recommend, especially in the context of lesser known languages?
So look, I'll try and answer those in one sort of sweep, but it may happen that I neglect one of your questions, and please feel free to bring me back on track or remind me if there's something I left out. So I'll begin with archiving, because I think that's really important. Of course, there are some just general technical considerations, like having things well indexed, searchable, proper metadata, high quality of data. So archiving things in the way that preserves them in the highest quality that they can. Then having them be sensitive to communities, because often communities might have material which is sensitive that they don't want widely shared. So designing that capacity into an archive can be a challenge, and persuading people, especially linguists, to deposit everything even when it's provisional. What we often find is that there might be a good linguist, and we say, well, can you deposit your materials? And they say, well, I haven't finished working on them yet. So maybe the recordings are there, but the transcriptions aren't, or the analysis isn't. So breaking that mindset of waiting till everything's ready, and rather having an incremental mindset where we say, well, the primary materials, sound files, video files, metadata, just get them in. Later on, you can add in transcriptions, annotations, analyses. That's a process that never ends, just like commentaries on classical texts never end. So those are some general design features of archives. Then there's the question of what goes in. And this goes back to Nikolaus Himmelmann's idea of, documentary linguistics, what should go in there. Ideally, everything from a culture, from a language. We want all words in all their uses, all grammatical structures, but we also want all the things that a culture knows, their songs, their ways of preparing different foods, their knowledge of each plant, what the fruits are, how you grow it, what it tells us, all of that. That's a huge task. It's really like an encyclopedia for each language, as channeled through a language, but recorded now in an audio-visual format. So that's really a huge job. I'm a big admirer of the Encyclopedia Mundarica. I think that's just an immense achievement. And if we think of that, of course, even that isn't complete, but something on that scale for each of the world's languages for an archive, and maybe try and imagine something like a 60 million word archive for every language. That's what we should be aspiring to. That's what we have for Greek or Sanskrit, roughly. And then let's think about how long it would take us to get there. Now, I've had some measurements done on this. For example, one of my outstanding students, Christian Dürler, worked on a Papuan language called Komso. He was very gifted at using software, very dedicated to doing transcriptions and so on. At the end of 4.5 years of PhD, he had about 8 hours of material archived, which is about, I think it's about 40,000 words. You can see what a tiny fraction of 60 million that is, because with our current technology to transcribe an unknown language, it's about 100 hours of work for 1 hour of primary material. So to get up to 60 million words, that's just an enormous enterprise. Now, we can probably accelerate that with technology. We can have, I think, computer-assisted transcription. I don't think we can ever fully automate it, but we can accelerate the process and, developing technologies that allow us to maybe move it from 100 to 1 to 20 to 1, then bringing in armies of native speakers to help us and using procedures like auto documentation, where we take advantage of things like Facebook, get people in the community filming things on their mobile phones, just speaking, recording what's going on, vacuuming all of that up into an archive. That's one way that we can start to harness this tremendous pool of talent and interest that's out there in communities. So maybe that's enough to say about your archiving question. For the question of models for description, I think there is no single model. The usual metrics that linguists have had since forever, that is completeness, coherence, rigor, explicitness. I would add semantic and cultural sensitivity. Those are all there. They pretty heavily constrain the way one writes a grammar, but still there's a lot of room for the individuality of the grammarian, which is a good thing. And it's great if you get several grammars of the same language, you can read them and sort of see, but that's probably a luxury that not many endangered languages will have. The tensions between the scientific desideratum, what's a rigorous description, the needs of a learner and the needs of a community is a very real and difficult one, because if we take as one principle of good description, let's stay true to the genius of the language. Let's try and find what is special about this language and how it works, and not, as we just heard from Professor Sachdeva, just import models, say, from Sanskrit into another language or whatever, but let's find out what works for this language. That's, a good linguist knows how to do that, but it will probably mean finding a grammatical term for something that doesn't correspond to terms in known use elsewhere. So we have to find a way of dealing with that. We don't want to not find the language-specific term, or we will fail to appreciate its genius. But we want to find a way to link it out, whether to the learner or to the community. Now, I think here that another technological development, that is hypertext, is going to be really useful, because we can have a term, we can introduce a definition, we can, in the future, write grammars in a way that the reader can have an option. Say, okay, well, what terminology do you want to use? Just switch it, this or that. Or here's an obscure term that you don't know. You don't know what ergative means? No problem. Just click on this. You're taken to a link that explains what it does. You want to move back and forth between a real text. Maybe you want to just look at a text of your grandmother preparing a beautiful recipe from your childhood, and there she is speaking. Here it is transcribed. Here I'm working through the words. I don't know that word. Click on it. You go to the dictionary. What's this suffix on the end? I don't know that. Click on that. Go out to the grammar. I think that we're going to get more and more interconnectivity built into our descriptions that join up the grammar, the dictionary, and a vast body of texts in an archive, but also offer different perspectives, the perspective perspective of a learner, the perspective of a typologist, for example, wanting to say, how do languages do comparatives, or how do they talk about the past tense, or whatever it may be. So I think that there's going to be a lot opening up in that space. I think there are tensions, but I think they're necessary tensions. It's good for us to have several different points of view on the world, as long as we know how to move between them. And I think learning that, which also means talking about what we do to different sorts of people, language teachers, language learners, kids in schools, people in tribal communities, people who don't work on the languages we work on, but work on languages somewhere else. All of those things help us open it up and make those sorts of connections. So I don't know if there were other things in your set of questions which I didn't cover there, but I tried to touch on them.
Tariq, unmute yourself. Tariq, unmute yourself.
Tariq, you're muted. Tariq, you're muted.
Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Professor Evans, for elaborately describing both the questions and the way one can proceed. I would like to repeat the third question that I guess requires your attention once again. That is between the two kinds of people who are very concerned about the safeguard and sustenance of linguistic diversity. On the one hand, you have linguists who are mostly inclined towards language documentation. On the other hand, you have people from literature and language, and they would suggest pedagogy of the language, teaching, learning of the language. So what do you recommend between the two approaches here, whether language documentation on the one hand or pedagogy of the languages? Over to you, sir.
I don't think it's an either or choice. I think they both inform each other in many interesting ways. I think if we look at linguistics around 1960, or from the publication of syntactic structures and a generativist movement under Chomsky and others, it was tremendously productive in some ways, but tremendously damaging in other ways to the field for lots of reasons. And I think one of the reasons was that for the first time in the history of linguistics, we were cut off from a belief that literature was vital to what we did. If you look at what Roman Jakobson said in the 1940s, he said that anyone who cares about language must be as interested in poetics as they are in grammar. Or if you look at someone like Edward Sapir, he wrote beautiful poetry as well as his grammatical work. It was taken for granted that the most potent and beautifully constructed uses of language are what linguists should also look for. Or in the Russian tradition of grammar writing, the example sentences would be drawn from the greats of Russian literature. Now, somewhere along the line in the 60s, that fell away. And there were some good reasons. Part of it, I think, was this very democratic belief that everyone can speak a language. You can have an IQ of 70 and not have even gone to kindergarten, and still you speak your mother tongue as well as the most highly educated person. Well, I don't think that's, there's some truth in it, but it's not entirely true. And the languages we speak are in part what they are because of the contributions of talented wordsmiths in the culture that has forged the language. I personally believe that those people are like the sort of advanced guard of language evolution. They detect the potential of structure, so they somehow smell it out and create new words, new structures, new rhymes, new systems of phonological organization. So I think the first thing linguistics has to do is to reconnect with that. It's probably true that in very few parts of the world, does a linguistics curriculum have anything on language and literature or language and style, or language and poetics, or language and musicology. We need to rebuild that connection to the humanities. And once we start doing that, that current gap between linguistics and literature will start to be bridged. The other thing is that for people from communities whose languages are in danger, as they try and learn back their languages, things like song, like ceremony, like ritual are very powerful and important. Because we all know if we learn another language, we get left behind very quickly. We think we know what to say, and then in the heat of the moment, we can't put the words together. But with a song, we rehearse it. We can rehearse it again and again. We can go in, we can sing it. We've had the time to perform it properly. And so song's important, but it's also very emotionally deep and connected. It touches elements of us that are so charged, so emotional, that we don't forget them or lose them. So I think it's through building that connection that both sides will be informed, and also through a reconnection with the text, with traditions of philology. Because here again, we had a distinction introduced by the generativists between I language and E language. It was just with I language, with speakers' knowledge of language, that linguistics should be concerned. That meant that everything that was out there, real texts, were no longer important. Now what we're seeing is that linguistics is moving back towards being an empirical science, where in order to say, here's a phenomenon, we have to be able to prove that someone really said it, a given person at a given time in a given context, to the point where it's already starting to happen, but I think in 10 years' time, this will just be a universal requirement. You shouldn't ever give an example without sourcing it all the way back. So any reader can go and check your transcription, your data, your interpretation. That inevitably means reconnecting linguistics to the world of texts and philology. And once again, we'll build that bridge up. So that's my view. It's only a partial answer to your question, but I hope it helps a little bit.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Evans. I think it is time we move on to the next item in the schedule. We do not have any more questions in the comment section. Over to the compares.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Tariq, and thank you, Nick. So there are several questions. I think we are running out of time. I really appreciate your patience, Nick, for being with us for 2 hours. And now the last part also, we request you to be here for another 20 minutes to listen to our director's speech. So
Thank you.
It was a wonderful lecture once again. I myself have several questions, but there is no time to interact with you in this particular medium. We will catch up over email or over WhatsApp.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And thank you
Nandri.
for all the great questions. Yeah.
Nandri. Yeah.
Unmute.
Can't hear, cannot hear. Unmute. And again unmute, it's still muted. It is still muted.
Am I audible now? Am I audible now?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
It is always fascinating to listen to a linguist talking passionately about his work on a language community. And at the same time, on the other hand, it is also emotional for a language community to have somebody work so passionately to preserve and to develop and also promote a language which and also to put out into the world where no one has known this language before. So thank you so much, Professor Ivan, for your wonderful lecture and scholastic presentation on the important topic, which stimulated interesting discussion. Now let us proceed further into the program. We have a presidential address by our director, but before I invite him, I would like to add a little bit about our director, our director, which Uma Madam has already said about him. Even though our director has been with us for a very short period of time, he has been our constant source of encouragement. He is one of the most dynamic, energetic, and one of the most humble human being we have come across. He is a leader in a true sense. Why I say this is because he does not just give a command, he leads in the forefront in whatever programs or whatever we do in CIIL. So we are very fortunate to have our director serve with us today. And I now, with utmost respect and admiration, I invite our Director Professor C.G. Venkateshamurthy to kindly give a presidential address. So kindly take your time.
Hello, everyone. I'm indeed very happy that today we are here on this virtual platform to celebrate the 53rd Foundation Day of the Central Institute of Indian Languages. We have Padma Shri and Founder Director of CIIL, Professor D.P. Patnaik ji, internationally renowned linguist, Professor Nicholas Evans, Deputy Secretary, Ministry of Education, Madam Suman Dikshit ji, distinguished guests, friends from media, my esteemed colleagues from CIIL, ladies and gentlemen. The Central Institute of Indian Languages, established on 17th July 1969, is the body on language matters in India. It works for the promotion of all languages of India, irrespective of their social, cultural, and political status. The primary functions of CIIL are to act as nodal agency of the country for language policy and language planning, to teach and conduct research, to coordinate programs and activities that complement and supplement the work of language institutes and many academic and government bodies, to facilitate development of all constitutionally recognized languages and classical languages of India, to protect, promote, and develop all languages, minor, minority, tribal, endangered, and lesser known languages of India through teaching and research. It advises and assists the Government of India and state governments and their agencies on language-related issues. CIIL works for all aspects of language development, including scientific studies, description, documentation, and teaching learning of Indian languages. It is also involved in publication of research and pedagogical materials for Indian languages, development and distribution of resources for language technology and artificial intelligence in Indian languages, book promotion in 121 Indian languages through its schemes, projects and grants in age, digitization and software development for Indian languages, audiovisual, online, self-monitored study materials, and MOOCs to learn Indian languages, language data archiving, which is one of our concerns, visual documentation on language-allied disciplines, creation of lexical resources like dictionaries, glossaries, thesauri, translation equivalents, etc., etc. CIIL has trained about 13,000 teachers from all states of India so far. On an average, 100 plus academic outreach programs are organized annually, archived the data of about 121 languages, 70 plus tribal and border languages studied, published around 1,200 plus books, produced audio-backed courses in numerous Indian languages, produced 4 online Bangla, Kannada, Tamil and Manipuri language learning courses, produced many films and documentaries, as well as radio programs in Indian languages, and it has also conducted socio-linguistic surveys. CIIL is involved in designing and offering courses and organizing academic events for special groups. It has conducted several seminars, workshops, summer schools, and short-term courses for special groups, conducted many innovative programs. It has also conducted conferences on dictionary making, mother tongue teaching, language instruction through mass media, organized conferences of heads of tribal research bureaus or institutions in India, and directors of public instruction. It has conducted trainings and workshops on non-formal and adult education, folklore analysis, evaluation, reading speed, comprehension, and such. CIIL is also involved in socially oriented outreach and extension programs. It has conducted programs for IAS and IPS probationers, trained about 500 officers of Karnataka in administrative Kannada, conducted certificate courses by correspondence to teach Tamil, courses in Bengali and courses in Telugu, apart from courses in Kannada for SBI, SBM bank officials. It has also conducted courses for local non-Kannada central government officers, journalists, executives, produced cassettes, audio courses, and TV capsules for teaching aspects of grammar of Indian languages. It has established 7 regional language centers called RLCs across India for coordinating the promotion of regional languages and sustenance of linguistic diversity of India through implementation of 3-language formula. The 7 RLCs have benefited nearly 13,000 in-service and prospective teachers in developing proficiency in second or third language, and thereby CIIL has been contributing to the emotional integration of the people of India through languages. I'm very happy to say that we have successfully implemented several centrally funded schemes, including National Testing Service India, National Translation Mission, Linguistic Data Consortium for Indian Languages, called LDCIL, the Center of Excellence for Studies in Classical Languages, grant in aid and projects like Bhasha Mandakini, multipurpose Indian language evaluation systems called MILES, Anukriti, Scheme for Protection and Preservation of Endangered Languages called SPELL, and Bharatvani project. The National Testing Service India NTS1 was launched in 2006 to cater to the testing and evaluation needs of the country. NTS1 has built graded assessment facilities in some languages, and it is expanding its outreach through regular skill development of teachers. NTS has been able to train around 12,000 teachers through 260 workshops and training programs. Thus, we have been able to train a good number of language teachers across the country. Our training programs, even during the current pandemic for the Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya, have been very satisfactory. We are in a process of preparing language teachers, shifting from content mastery to competency-based teaching learning, which is the shift we are witnessing in the school education. We want to remain relevant for the systemic requirements. I'm very happy to share the joy of our 4 RLCs, which are turning 50 years. SRLC Mysore, ERLC Bhubaneswar, WRLC Pune, and NRLC Patiala have rendered 50 glorious years of service to the nation and its languages. On this special occasion, we are initiating a process of reflecting upon the 5 decades of existence of our RLCs in order to adopt to futuristic changes. The consultative meet, which is a part of the Foundation Day celebrations, is the beginning of this intrinsic intent. The National Translation Mission, launched in 2008, works on making the higher education available in all scheduled languages by translating textbooks, creating lexical resources and translation tools, and by training translators too. The mission has published 130 materials relevant for dissemination of higher education in Indian languages and trained over 5,000 translators. It has also created 20 resources for technical translation and brings out what is called Translation Today, a UGC CARE approved journal. We are continuing to do that. We are very happy about our Translation Today. The CIIL has the Linguistic Data Consortium for Indian Languages, LDCIL, which is a centrally funded scheme that works for building digital corpora for Indian languages. LDCIL has already launched corpora for languages of the 8th schedule of the Constitution of India, and the same is available for the access of general public as well as the industry. The Centers of Excellence for Studies in Classical Languages are initiatives of the Government of India, and they are being realized through CIIL. Presently, we have 4 classical language centers, one each for Kannada, Telugu, Odia, and Malayalam. Kannada and Telugu centers have full strength, while Odia and Malayalam centers are the project directors, and we are in the process of recruiting other necessary staff. We are hopeful that soon the Centers of Excellence in Classical Languages will be fully functional. One of our flagship programs is Bharatvani project, which works for the digitization and web hosting of published resources in Indian languages. The portal has representation of 98 languages in about 92 subdomains, including textbooks, dictionaries, and teaching learning materials in textual and multimedia formats. It also provides mobile-based apps to its users. Soon, we will also be able to make this mobile-based app disable-friendly, making it based on the intent of the Universal Designs of Learning called the UDLs. Another important engagement of CIIL is working for Scheme for Protection and Preservation of Endangered Languages called SPELL, a project which works for the safeguard and revitalization of such endangered languages that have less than 10,000 speakers. It started operating in 2013 and is working on documentation of endangered languages as well as making pedagogic resources in them and for them. SPELL has identified and started working on 117 languages in its initial phase. Other remaining languages would also be added subsequently. The CIIL library is a state-of-the-art library, which is one of the most resourceful libraries of our country as far as studies on Indian languages and linguistic researches are concerned. Established in 1970, it is now fully digitized and has 7 integrated constituents in the regional centers. It has well over 2 lakh print and non-print materials. We are not complacent, we are going to make it bigger. This library subscribes to the widest range of journals in languages in India, and we intend to make it bigger and bigger. The CIIL has also established a printing and publication unit in 1976, which is doing well. It is well equipped with end-to-end printing and publication facility. It has brought out well over 1,500 publications that may be the first publication in several languages and act as important references. The Institute has completed several projects to enable and strengthen the languages of India. For instance, Bhasha Mandakini, Miles, Anukruti are worthy of taking a note. The pedagogical materials for various languages published by this institute have been followed by individuals as well as institutions across the country. Another important engagement of CIIL is the grant in aid, which promotes authors, editors, translators, and publishers in Indian languages. Established in 1994 by the Ministry of Education, the then MHRD, this major scheme of Government of India supports publication in Indian languages through bulk purchases and financial assistance to the authors of publishing books and little magazines and to the institutions for organizing workshops and conferences. We are continuing to do our best in this also. The institution has been providing language and translation related consultancies to various ministries and agencies of the central and state governments. It has completed numerous projects for them as well. The institution has been organizing numerous programs in collaboration with various universities and institutions for the promotion of Indian languages in all the manifestations. Presently, this is one such unique institution that works for all aspects of language and focuses on languages of India. I'm very happy to place it on record that in spite of human resource crunch, we have been able to do our best, taking multiple roles in CIIL and trying our best to be relevant for society and professionals alike. We hope to grow and become more professional in the days to come. We are indeed very thankful to all the presenters, all the ideas that have come up today. We shall integrate them meaningfully in becoming more professionals. On this Foundation Day, I extend my warm wishes to all present and to the entire CIIL family. The contributions made by all in the past have been the reason for the glory of this institute, which we are cherishing today. I sincerely thank all academic and non-academic members of this family for their contribution in building this wonderful institution. I thank all the invitees and the scholars who have agreed to be part of our Foundation Day and in making this a grand success. Happy Foundation Day to all the members of the CIIL. Jai Hind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your inspiring speech, sir, especially highlighting on the various projects attainments of Central Institute of Indian Languages, Mysuru. Yes, we have come to the concluding part of the program. Before we do that, I request Dr. Dharmesh Fernandez, Professor cum Deputy Director, Central Institute of Indian Languages, Mysuru, to propose vote of thanks. Sir, over to you.
सबको नमस्कार. Very warm good afternoon from Central Institute of Indian Languages. It is a very good beginning for the Foundation Day. It will take further the same enthusiasm and the interest shown by the CIIL fraternity and all the linguists around the world. First, I thank the chief guest, Padma Shri Professor D.P. Patnaik, how the Central Institute of Indian Languages has given birth and how he wants his brainchild to grow further. That also he expressed. His inspirational speech will boost us to take this CIIL to the next higher level. I'm thanking you, sir. Then I thank our Deputy Secretary, Srimati Suman Dikshit, Ministry of Education, Government of India. She has endorsed all the CIIL projects, schemes. Normally, the Central Institute of Indian Languages Foundation Day, it showcases how the Central Institute of Indian Languages worked and how it has done so many good things for the society and the nation. But those projects and events have been purely endorsed by the Deputy Secretary in her speech. I'm thanking you, ma'am. It's the first Foundation Day speech given by Professor Nicholas Evans. It is very interesting, and so many people have actively interacted with him. I'm thanking you. The third part of the challenge, you talked about the challenges to the Central Institute of Indian Languages. Already, Professor Rajesh Sachdeva, the former director, has mentioned about it. Since Central Institute of Indian Languages is not awarding the PhD degrees, it may not be taken to the public domain of the lesser known languages studied by Central Institute of Indian Languages. The Government of India has specially exclusively given a project scheme for protection, preservation, protection of endangered languages. It has taken care of one of your challenges. I mean, most of the challenges you talked about, very lesser descriptive languages, or I mean, lesser known languages, descriptive studies are taking that. But as I said, we do not have PhD degree, it has not come to the limelight, but we work so many languages. And this one of the challenges which you have given to the CIIL, already we are working on it. We have engaged interdisciplinary areas. I mean, anthropologists, sociologists, folklorists, even in recent days, in some of the classical languages, the scholars with musical background he has been engaged to study on classical languages. So most of the challenges which you put before the Central Institute of Indian Languages is already on, it's in progress, and it should reach to the expected level. Of course, you talked about the archives. We have a raw speech corpora, which our director also mentioned. We have plenty of data. Whether you talk about Basha Mandakini and so many, of course, you mentioned about the earlier the cassettes revival and other things. Will take care of your suggestions and challenges. And I'm thanking you for your first inaugural foundation, this inaugural day, this foundation lecture. I'm thanking you, Professor. I'm wishing you very good night, a good evening and good night. And of course, my thanks to my director, Professor C.G. Venkateshamurthy. He has taken everything in his speech and how the CIIL is functioning and how it develops to bring out the linguistic harmony in the nation. And everyone pointed out is very actively encouraging and taking part in all the activities. This inaugural day of this foundation day has begun well, and it will proceed for further 3 days symbolically, and it will be continued till to the end. I thank Professor C.G. Venkateshamurthy, our director. Thank you very much, sir. I'm thanking all my CIIL colleagues and RLC colleagues who have been associated with different schemes, projects, everyone, academic and non-academic, all the regional center staff, academic, and I thank all CIIL fraternity who worked with us and who are working with us, and all the coordinators of different event managers for this Foundation Day. I'm thanking one and all. My thanks to Professor Uma Rani, Deputy Director, who has given the overall coordination of this Foundation Day. Thanking you, ma'am. I thank our technical team. You know, this technical unit has been doing marvelous work. And also I thank our anchors, because already ma'am said it is not an physical Foundation Day celebration. So they are not companies, they are anchors. I'm thanking the anchors. I think I've thanked everyone. I thank all the CIIL fraternity and all the scholars around the world, and for your wishes. I'm thanking you very much. I request all of you to follow the protocols prescribed by the Government of India to get away from this pandemic, and we can win. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
You could also thank the press, which will be hopefully carrying your news of the entire thing.
Yeah, media persons, some people were physically, they were present. And already it has been published in some of the newspapers. The activities, all the activities of Central Institute of Indian Languages, always the press, it takes to the public domain. And I appreciate them. Most of them, we have arranged a live streaming in the press club of Mysore. All the press and media people, with the apology for which you deserve a very sincere thanks. I'm thanking you all. Thank you very much.
Okay, Nicholas, thank you so much for your excellent lecture and hope to see you sometime. Take care.
Fernandez, sir, for the vote of thanks. We have come to the end of the inaugural program. With this, I would like to thank each and everyone for your participation and contribution for making this session successful. The next session begins at 3 p.m. And I request everyone, please join us again via YouTube and Facebook. Thank you. Namaskara.